Japan, where etiquette is king and social rules are god. While I've had a host of wonderful experiences in the time that I've lived here, there have been those times where I have, to put it bluntly, f***ed up. If you aren't careful, navigating Japanese etiquette as a foreigner can make you feel like a wrecking ball, hopelessly smashing against the unwritten formal rules that govern society, pissing off the locals and destroying the reputation of all foreigners in the process. While my understanding of Japanese etiquette has improved considerably over the last few years, when I was new in Japan there were times where my failure to understand left me humiliated. In this video, you'll hear about the times where I angered my superiors at work, got yelled at by an elderly woman, almost got in trouble with the police, and came close to vomiting in front of my co-workers by eating the wrong thing. Cringe along with me as I reveal my most shameful f***ups. And let this be a warning to you if you come to Japan, so you don't repeat these mortifying mistakes. Number 1, that time I forgot my place in the hierarchy. In Japanese business, I'm sure you know that unwritten rules govern all work here. They're inflexible and unable to be compromised in any way. You can't go home until the boss does, you're expected to attend work functions, you can't take time off for personal reasons, and so on. It's perhaps the most brutal work culture in the entire developed world. Like every negative aspect of global working culture has been condensed and dialed up to 11. But there is one rule above all else in Japanese business, and is not something that may be found in your culture, and this is the importance of hierarchy. Well, hierarchy exists all over the world. We know that your supervisor is above you, the boss is above them, the area manager is above them, and then the CEO is at the top, or whatever it may be. But the way you talk to your superiors may be different to what you expect here in Japan. In Australia, we'd usually talk to anybody in the office in a casual manner, calling them by their first name. If my supervisor was named John Smith, we would just call him John and exchange pleasantries in a normal way. Good morning, John. How was your weekend? Yeah, good mate, and yours? And so on. Compare this to Japan, where you would not use their first name. Instead of John, you may have to call him by his title. Good morning, supervisor. I trust you are well rested over the weekend. Is there anything I can do to assist you? Might be how this conversation goes down in Japan. I embarrassed myself when I forgot these hierarchical rules at the English school I worked at in my first year in Japan. At that time, we were one of 7 schools in the area, or shibu, managed by an area manager, a shibucho. In meetings when we talked about the area manager when she wasn't there, we'd usually refer to her by her name, Ms. Tanaka. But when she visited the school, we would address her directly by her title, area manager. Despite her seniority in the company, she was always very friendly and pleasant, engaging us foreign teachers in pleasant small talk. So normally, when she came to visit, the greeting would go like this. Good morning, area manager. It's nice to see you again. How are you today? I'm well, thanks. How about yourself? But one day, I misspoke. After a week on holiday, my defenses were down and the Australian spirit within me rose to the surface. Momentarily forgetting my place in the hierarchy, the following slipped out. Good morning, Ms. Tanaka. How are you today? Before I realized what I'd done, her expression turned to ice. After what I felt was the longest pause with her making unbreaking eye contact, she said, Ms. Tanaka, am I? Put in my place, reminded of the debt I have to thousands of years of hierarchical culture, preceding my arrival into a country that is definitely not my own, slapped in the face by my own thoughtless disrespect. I apologized profusely, she turned away to get on with her work on the computer, and I felt horrible for the rest of the day, and dare I say, the rest of the week. A week later when she returned to visit, it was business as usual and she was pleasant to me again, seemingly having forgotten all about my slip-up, as she surely had many other more important things to think about in her busy week. But whenever I saw her again, I reminded myself of my place in the hierarchy. 6 years later, I've never made that mistake again. So if you come to Japan for work, do not underestimate the importance Japanese people place on hierarchy. Even though people will be very nice to you, remember that this invisible hierarchical structure governs all operations in Japan. And remembering your place within it goes a long way to preserving the harmony of your working environment. Is office hierarchy important in your culture? Please let me know in the comments below how it compares to Japan. Anyway, time for an experience that ended in a much more brutal scolding. Number 2, that time an old lady yelled at me. When you think of Japanese people, you probably imagine the kindest, politest people on the planet. Always happy to help you out in a bind, going above and absolutely beyond to ensure that your stay in Japan is as pleasant as possible. And most of the time, that's how it is. But pray you don't come across the most feared members of Japanese society, the Osaka Oba-chan. Oba-chan means grandma or old woman, and the Osaka Oba-chan is a unique subculture that has blossomed out of the Kansai region. Usually clad in leopard print and chunky jewelry, these ladies are loud, boisterous, boisterous and opinionated. Get on their good side and they'll take you under their wing, offering you candies and snacks on a constant basis. Get on their bad side and they will absolutely let you have it. They won't hold back and will make you feel insignificant beneath their prowess. Let me detail my embarrassing run-in with one of them. It was a sunny, early spring day in Kobe where I used to work. Kobe being right next to Osaka. I'd been living in Japan for almost a year at that point. On a day off from work, I made a plan with my friend Robert to check out a new burrito place, go for a walk, and head to a hot spring after. In short, a perfect day out. Arriving at the burrito place, there was nowhere to sit, but no problem, we took it to a park and sat on a bench. As the sauce was getting all over my hands, I had to take a break from playing Pokemon Go and put my phone on the bench next to me. We talked, we munched, we laughed, and we got up to leave. About 5 minutes later, I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. Obviously, it was back at the bench, so we walked back to go get it. I wasn't panicked at all, as normally when you lose something in Japan, I always see dropped gloves and such on the street, waiting for their owner's retrieval. Japan is very safe in that way, and your lost items are unlikely to be stolen. And yet, after only 5 minutes, my phone was gone. This was when I became distraught. Things never go missing in Japan, right? I got Robert to lend me his phone, on which I frantically dialed my own number. It rang out, but no answer. I went to use the Find My Phone feature, so we chased the live GPS location down the street. But we couldn't find anyone. I kept ringing, and there was no answer. Just as I thought about going to the police, I saw my own number ringing Robert's phone. I picked it up, and on the other end was a very grumpy old lady. "Why do you keep calling this number? Don't you have any idea how annoying your ringtone is?" I can't really blame her, as lacking in personality as I am, it was this horrendous iPhone default. She explained that her 6-year-old granddaughter had found my phone walking home from school, thought it looked like fun, and brought it home to grandma. After negotiating in my horrendously broken Japanese, the grandma agreed to meet me at the closest Lawson convenience store. And that's when I saw her, the final boss of the Osaka Oba-chan. Clad in purple with matching purple eyeshadow and lipstick, she looked like a villain you might see in a Japanese role-playing game, and her expression showed me that she was not in the mood for f***ing around. I went over and apologized for the trouble, but instead of a simple handover, she really let me have it. "What the f*** were you thinking? You can't leave your stuff lying around here in Japan. If you come here, you need to be more careful and not be so absent-minded. You've caused me so much damn inconvenience today, I should have just taken your phone to the police station." I did my best to remain humble and apologetic, but her scolding continued. Eventually, she handed it over, to which I said, "Thank you so much. Can I buy you some chocolates here at Lawson for your troubles?" To which she replied, "I don't want your damn chocolate, just be careful." And then she walked off. Me and Robert hid in the Lawson until she was well and truly out of sight, and then he laughed at me in utter hysterics. So after that 2-hour ordeal, we finally made our way to the hot spring. So if you find yourself in Japan, always keep an eye on your stuff, and always pat down your pockets whenever you stand up to leave anywhere. In this video, I detailed a more typical experience where my lost wallet turned up at the police station. Usually, even if you lose your stuff, it will find its way back to you. But if you find yourself in the Kansai region, be careful of who finds it, as they may just tear you a new one, like was done to me. But what should you really be more afraid of? An old lady or the police? Let's weigh that up with number 3, that time I almost got in trouble with the police. Like that last story, this story is also about a lost item, but something far more valuable than my iPhone 6. But this, my residence card or Zairyu card. If you live in Japan under a Japanese visa, you'll be given one of these. It is not only an identity card, but your only form of proof of your residence status. For legal reasons, you have to keep it on your person at all times. The police often stop foreigners for ID checks, so you really don't want to be caught without it. While I've somehow managed to avoid being stopped by the cops for the last 7 years, the majority of my friends have been stopped on more than one occasion. That's probably because they get out more than I do. Anyway, if there's one thing you absolutely cannot lose while you live here, it's your residence card. And of course, I managed to lose it. In fact, I'd lost it for 2 whole days without even noticing. It all started when I went to the post office to send some Christmas cards home to my family. When you send post in Japan, like all countries, you have to write a return address, as well as a contact phone number, which would be easy enough, but addresses in Japan are incredibly complicated. complicated. Streets don't have names, so you have to write a series of numbers to explain which neighborhood, which block, and in which property you live, followed by the name of the apartment building and your room number. Forgetting which numbers my place corresponded to, as well as the complicated Chinese characters that made up my apartment name, whenever I had to write out my address, I would just pull out my residence card and copy it off the back. And that's what I'd done at the post office, where I copied out my address, but left it on the counter and was completely none the wiser. A day later, I kept getting repeated phone calls from the same number while I was at work. Being a cliched millennial that panics at the thought of having to answer the phone, coupled with the crippling thought of having to do it in a second language, I just kept letting it go. The next day, the calls kept coming. The day after, they came again. That was when I decided it was enough. Sheepishly, embarrassedly, and meekly, I asked a coworker to help me. I felt that whoever was insisting on calling must have something important to tell me. I hate having to bother coworkers with personal problems, for fear of causing meiwaku, or inconvenience. Thankfully, a young woman I worked with was happy to oblige me. She called the number and began a back and forth in Japanese. I didn't understand it, but I remember her looking at me, phone in one hand, with an expression of shock. She put the phone on her shoulder and said, "Dale, do you have your residence card?" I opened up my wallet as my stomach sank. It was not there, seemingly having gotten up and walked off on its own. My coworker then reported what had happened. It was the post office that was calling me. It was their policy to keep lost items for 3 days before handing them over to the police. That's right, the police. I was horrified at the thought of having to go to the police station, having to explain why I had so carelessly left the most important possession I owned so flippantly on the post office counter. The post office said they would keep my card until 4 p.m. that day before handing it over to the cops. The time then was 2 p.m. I had classes from 3 p.m. The post office was located near my home, about 20 minutes walk there and 20 minutes walk back. My 1 hour lunchtime had already started. I had 50 minutes to get my card back. I knew what I had to do. I headed out, literally running to the post office in the middle of the day wearing a suit, tie, and business shoes. Arriving at the post office, I was greeted by a line of elderly customers. Waiting 10 minutes, I finally got to the counter and got my all-important Zairyu card back. I apologized for causing them meiwaku and ran back to the office. Horrified at the thought of having to work 6 hours on an empty stomach, I raced into the convenience store and bought 2 egg and ham sandwiches. I wolfed them down mid-run and made it back just in time for my next class. Covered in sweat, with ham on my breath. Wiping my face with a handkerchief and almost choking on a handful of breath mints, I walked into my next class proudly, my resident status in Japan safe. Looking back on that experience, I probably should not have feared a run-in with the police, as a few years later I did have to go to a police station to get my wallet back, and there was no grilling by the cops or anything like that. And as for why I couldn't have taken lunch later, remember that your working hours in Japan are fixed and inflexible. Please see this video for more information on that. So, by running to the post office and stuffing my face with sandwiches, did I overreact in this situation? Probably. But still, that fear of causing meiwaku or inconvenience to others still runs high in my daily life here. I inconvenienced co-workers, post office staff, and could have potentially inconvenienced the cops too. Let me know in the comments if you think I overreacted. Still, I think the cops would have been nicer to me than that old lady. Anyway, time for a lighter topic. Number 4, that time I ate something I shouldn't have. Have you ever seen this before? This is edamame, a green bean commonly eaten as a snack while drinking. They're usually the first thing that comes out at an izakaya or Japanese pub, but be careful, there is a right way and a very wrong way to eat them. I was in for a rude awakening with edamame etiquette in my very first week in Japan. On my 4th day at my new job, I was invited to a nomikai, or drinking party. This was with my new co-workers to celebrate my arrival and the departure of the outgoing teacher. I remember that week being so tired, so confused, so overwhelmed, thrown into a brand new housing situation and job, plus dealing with a whole new set of cultural expectations can be quite a lot for a young person to deal with, and I was certainly feeling it after 2 long weeks of training at company headquarters and 4 long days of work at my new school. Yet, powerless to refuse the offer, even with another day of work scheduled for the next morning, I went in with my best efforts, eager to people please and toe the line. When we sat down at the izakaya, all of the food was taken care of by senior co-workers. They ordered what they wanted for all of us, and the first thing that came out was that plate of mysterious beans. Being the new guy, they caught up and chatted about familiar topics, while I just stared in hunger and awe. Lunch had been 7 hours prior, where I hadn't eaten much, considering the stress of being in a new situation. With everyone else too caught up in their conversation to notice the beans, and with my hunger levels and intrigue increasing, I reached across the table and put one of these beans into my mouth. What I tasted was not at all what I expected. Hard, crunchy, bitter, with a skin that felt furry to the touch. I was in utter disbelief that 138 million people could enjoy this so-called appetizer. And speaking of disbelief, that was the expression on my new co-workers' faces, as they stopped talking and looked at me. Feeling like I wanted to throw up, I kept chewing and eventually swallowed, reaching for my oolong tea to wash it down. And then came the laughter. Shocked that I'd never seen this food before, once the chorus of giggles subsided, my new co-workers taught me how to eat these the correct way. You squeeze the beans one by one into your mouth and dispose of the skins in an empty bowl. Like this, they taste incredible. It goes well with whatever you're drinking, and has a pleasant texture, certainly not to be missed when you're out on the town with your mates. But I just cannot forget the amount of face that I lost. Having made a poor impression on new co-workers, appearing culturally unversed about the simplest of Japanese foods, not having made enough effort to learn the customs of the society that I'd chosen to migrate to. But like the other experiences I've talked about, it's probably an overreaction and overthinking on my part. While I felt embarrassed, everyone else quickly forgot about it and moved on with their lives. But to this day, whenever I see these guys, I'm still traumatized by my first encounter with them. So, these are but a sampling of the many embarrassing experiences I've had here, and you too could expect to have some of your own like this if you chose to move to Japan. How about you? What etiquette mistakes would you be afraid of making here in Japan? Do you think Japan's etiquette and social rules are too harsh? Whatever you think, let me know in the comment section below. On this channel, I'm sharing my stories on life as a foreigner in Japan, and making videos on travel spots I recommend. If that interests you, don't forget to subscribe. I'm also making video game reviews on a separate channel, so if Japanese games interests you, don't forget to subscribe to that one too. Thanks for watching guys, and I'm off to the izakaya to get some edamame. I will see you next time.